Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ted Bolema for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa. Yeah, I mean, for launching a center like this, it just makes such a difference to have a supportive dean, and I have really appreciated having a chance to work with Larissa for the last year and a half. I spoke to you about a year ago about a technology topic, and our center's come a long way in that time. So at that time, for a year, I was the only person with the institute. We had just hired our second faculty member at the time I spoke to you. Since then, we've added 3 more. In fact, one of them is here. Eric Moda is in the back. So So Eric is our expert on entrepreneurship policy, so a very important area that fits in with our theme of economic growth. And so, as of a year ago, we mostly were kind of following my passions of technology policy, which is what I like to do. So I talked to you about a year ago about net neutrality and some of the implications for internet policy. Since then, we've kind of been thinking, where do we need to go next, and what's an important area that where we can make a contribution, looking ahead as to what the future issues will be, even apart from whatever the election results are. And one we settled on was state fiscal policy. We think that's going to be a very hot topic as states adapt to how they're going to deal with their holes in their budget following the COVID shutdowns and all the other things that have been going on with states. And so it's kind of a return to me to a topic that I had focused on about 10 years ago when I did a report when I was living in the state of Michigan. And I presented this research earlier this year in Topeka before the Senate Finance Committee, where they were looking at the renewal legislation for the STAR bonds and a few other topics at the time. At this point, I don't think I'm really an expert on what exactly Kansas is doing, but I did pay a lot of attention to this topic for a long time in Michigan when I lived there. And I think we can learn in other states, Kansas and any other states, about just what we can really expect if we have a government policies that are really focused on targeted tax incentives. So that's what we're looking at today. Like I said, this is a 10-year-old report, but I think it holds up really well, and the lessons from it are still important for today. I'll just give you a little background on Michigan. It's a 2010 report. At the time, we were just coming out of the Great Recession at that time, but in Michigan, it felt like it was a lot longer than that. If you talk to someone from Michigan and you use the term one-state recession or the Michigan's lost decade, they'll probably know what you're talking about, and that is the decade from about 2000 to 2007 when the Great Recession started. During that time, Michigan effectively was in a recession, while Kansas and the rest of the country were experiencing a good solid decade of economic growth leading up to about 2007. Even more troubling, I think, was that Michigan was moving from what had been a very high income state. If you look at average incomes in Michigan up to that point, we've always been known as being a state that like in the top 10 or so in terms of incomes. Auto industry jobs were very well-paying jobs for a long time. And but what was happening, we had a very cyclical economy. We're kind of used to that here in Wichita with the aerospace industry, but Michigan is very dependent on the auto industry. But kind of the attitude for a long time was, yes, there's ups and downs in the economy because of the auto industry and how cyclical it is, but we always bounce right back. Well, we were getting into a pattern where we really weren't quite bouncing back, that after each recession, it seems like we were further behind in terms of incomes as compared before, and we were moving from a high income state to a middle of the pack sort of income state. So I thought that was pretty troubling at the time. You could find some government policies that were really troubling too. Michigan at the time, fortunately, doesn't have either of these anymore, but it used to have something called the single business tax, which an overly simplistic summary of it is it was basically a revenue tax for businesses, not a profits tax, a revenue tax. Well, from a government perspective, that's a nice way to be taxing businesses. If you have a recession and a company's income drops by 15%, that might wipe out their profits for the year. but they still have 85% of their revenues, and they're being taxed at 85% of what they were before. So, that's not a good strategy for helping businesses pull out of recessions, and it can basically make recessions hit businesses even harder. Finally, we got fed up with the single business tax, and unfortunately replaced it with something even worse, the Michigan business tax, which I don't think anybody understood. The good thing about that one is it only lasted a few years and it's been replaced, so I'll come back to that a little later on. But anyway, both of these are gone now. But just kind of tying it into my theme for the day, the main economic strategy in Michigan at times seemed to be targeted tax incentives. How do we try to get businesses to come here by making deals with them in order to come and give them discounts on the taxes that they were going to pay? So that was really the focus, and that's the focus of the study I'm going to talk about today. So anyway, just kind of leading into it, I'll give a little background. As a more market-oriented economist, when I hear the idea of a targeted tax incentive, I start out pretty skeptical right from the start. That you mean state government and local government officials can beat the market? That they can figure out pick winners and losers better than the market process can? I mean, why aren't they on Wall Street and really cashing in on their expertise? So I just it doesn't seem like on the surface it really makes any sense to me. So, but there does seem to be some response or some belief still at state governments that they can do that. Another reason I've always been concerned about it is the potential for mission creep, or other agendas to creep into whatever the programs are. And in our study, we quoted from a Michigan Department of Environmental Quality flyer that we thought was really interesting. This is the environmental agency in the state of Michigan, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and they have a brownfield incentive program that the state had created. They're pretty common. Brownfields are contaminated properties, and so if you clean up a contaminated property, you could get a tax break for it. Well, okay, that seems to make some sense, but what we came across was a promotional flyer that they were giving out saying property does not have to be contaminated to be eligible for brownfield incentives in Michigan. So you don't have to be a brownfield to qualify for a brownfield incentive. So that's what I mean by mission creep. Well, we looked a little deeper. That got us interested. We looked a little deeper, and it actually was being used as a typical tax incentive to try to get businesses to develop properties that weren't being used. But it's being administered by the Department of Environmental Quality. I mean, isn't that kind of like putting Dr. Fauci in charge of our economic recovery? I mean, it's, they've got some expertise in what they do, but not, this isn't the agency that you associate with economic development. And so that's what I mean by mission creep. I'm going to give a couple other examples a little later on. Wrong way. Got to master the. And then another reason I'm start out skeptical is, just think, how is success measured? How do we tell if a program's working? How do we figure out how we can make it better? Well, it turns out we got an answer in Michigan, at least as of at that time. How is success measured? It wasn't. We actually ran into that right at the beginning of the process. We thought our first step in writing this report was going to be, okay, let's go get the list. Let's find the list of all the targeted tax incentives and see which ones are the most important and which ones we want to focus on. Okay, who's got the list? Well, nobody had the list. So we had to build a list. I think we found like 54 of these different programs that don't seem to be coordinated particularly, and put a lot of effort into just identifying what the different targeted tax incentive programs are. And apparently we were the first to do that. And we're not even sure we got them all, but we found 50-some of these different programs, and nobody seemed to be paying a lot of attention to them, and there really wasn't too much being done in the area of trying to measure whether they're working or not, or any kind of audits as to whether they're doing what the press release said that is going to be accomplished as a result of it. So those are some reasons I started out kind of skeptical of the whole idea. anyway, here's the report. I see it's my co-authors on it were Patrick Anderson and Alex Rosane. I was at the time I was a partner in the firm Anderson Economic Growth. So Patrick Anderson is the founder of it. We were a rather interesting group. Patrick is very much a Republican in Michigan. He's actually run for state office, been the Republican nominee for state office. I'm more of a libertarian, and Alex was our liberal on the group. And so we had some different viewpoints that we brought to it. But it's kind of interesting. We really did all agree on, we kind of thought we may have to hash out a few things, but as the evidence emerged, we really were pretty much in agreement. By the way, what I'm particularly proud of with this report is who we got to pay for it. We got the National Education Association to pay for it. Yes. How do we do that? Well, they agree with us on this particular issue. These targeted tax incentives blow holes in school budgets when they're given out, especially when they're given out without a lot of real thought for what's going to happen to the schools as a result of these programs. So, they've got a little different perspective in terms of why they're concerned about it, but in terms of our analysis, they were very happy with what we produce. So, as a libertarian, I'm often not in agreement with them, but on this issue, we got along great, and really glad. I'd love to work with them again on this issue, because and I think this is how there might be some potential for coalitions on dealing with these sort of programs. Well, I actually had been, Patrick and I in particular had been engaged on this topic for some time even before we wrote the report. Actually, that's why the National Education Association came to us to work with them on it. But we'd been commenting on this issue for a while, and we'd been getting some pushback. And so before we actually had done the study and looked at what the evidence was, we had been making different sort of more theoretical sort of comments, and like I've been making up to this point, and we got some responses to them. Let's take a look at a few of them. One of them is that government officials have a broader perspective than the narrow focus of self-interested businesses. I mean, businesses just look at what's in front of them, their narrow perspective right around them. Well, government officials can take a broader view of everything. Yeah, okay. Well, okay, you're anticipating my next line. There's more evidence that the opposite is true, is what we concluded pretty quickly from it. That, there's actually, as I mentioned, there's almost no tracking of the actual benefits of the programs. I already mentioned that. But even worse, what we found, and we're kind of aware of already, is there's lots of examples out there of Michigan tax incentives being used to bring in companies from out of state to come in and compete with companies that were already established in Michigan and already paying their taxes. I mean, how would you like to be in that position? You're minding your own business, running your business, paying your taxes, and you pick up the newspaper one day and you find out that one of your competitors or somebody's being given a tax incentive to come in and compete with you. My friends at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, who I've done some work with from time to time in Michigan, but they actually had a whole list of a bunch of them. One of them that really stood out to me was Cabela's. There's a huge Cabela's store in Michigan, way bigger than the one here. I mean, it's actually a tourist destination. It's actually on the list of top tourist destinations in the state of Michigan. It's so big. And it got a tax incentive to come in and set up this huge store. Well, the problem with that is that there actually were a couple of Michigan-based sporting goods stores that were kind of like that, the big sporting goods stores with a big theme focus of hunting, and one of them went out of business not too long after that. So we can talk about all the jobs created at the Cabela's store and the economic impact, and we would hear all about that. But do we ever subtract off all the lost jobs from the company that went out of business as a result of that? So when I say government officials have a broader perspective, if anything, I think businesses have a broader perspective. They at least look at the market and is there room in the market for the business that they're trying to do? And I don't think we're getting even that from government officials when they're doing. At least there's a lot of evidence that isn't done very well. And the other one we hear all the time is you can't unilaterally disarm and lose businesses to other states. So we just can't do it. We can't afford to do that. Then all the other states will get the businesses. Well, it kind of presumes that these programs are helping you, and that's kind of the problem I have with this. Now, this report is actually the one time that I've had an editorial cartoon produced by someone else as a result of some work we're doing. Now, it ties in with the Mackinac Center, too, but here's an editorial cartoon that came out around that time at the Detroit News by, if you see the people in it, the guy in the black suit in front says Michigan on the front, and there's Ohio, and the caption to it is, "Drop our business incentive programs? But that would be unilateral disarmament." So yes, our cartoonist there at the Detroit News actually got it. So I usually don't do quite so well in the media when we're trying to make arguments like this, but I'm kind of happy with that one. I think that really does summarize it. Are these programs helping or aren't they? We're kind of skipping over that question when we talk about we can't unilaterally disarm. I mean, should we unilaterally disarm? Is I think a better question. And another one we get is, it's naive to think that businesses won't come here without incentives. Here's the other side to that cartoon. There actually was an editorial in a different newspaper in Michigan, kind of in response to what we wrote, and that was kind of what they were saying about us. So we were kind of naive in our report and thinking that businesses won't come here without getting tax incentives. That's just not how business is done nowadays. Well, that's interesting perspective, I suppose, but I don't know if you can see this too well. These are coupons from a restaurant. And my friend Jack McHugh from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy gave a really good analogy that I like at this particular point. He said, suppose you're running a restaurant and you notice you're losing business. Some of your regular customers aren't coming, and you're just not getting the sort of business that you used to. So maybe what you do is you put a coupon in. The first one that says 20% off is the first coupon there. And there's another one, buy one, get one free. Okay, that's still not working. Maybe we should get another one. How about a 50% off discount? And when you try these things, and you're still not getting a lot of customers coming in. And then you run across one of your regular customers who hasn't been there in a while, and you ask him, well, why aren't you coming by anymore? And he says to you, well, your food just hasn't been that tasty. Service was really slow when I was there the last time. Your prices are kind of high. Some of your employees are kind of rude. How do you respond? Can I give you a coupon for the next time you come? I mean, that's kind of the idea behind it. I mean, there are fundamental problems probably behind a reason why your restaurant isn't doing well, and I think that really should be where the focus is on for state and local policies on trying to promote economic growth, not on giving discounts, not on giving coupons on a discount on your property taxes or your other taxes, but rather try to just address the fundamentals. Make your food taste better. Have your customers be friendlier. Have faster service. The fundamentals like that really is where you should be looking. Anyway, like I say, this is all kind of theoretical up to this point. Let's look at what we actually found. Typically when you see studies about the effectiveness of targeted tax incentives, they all use kind of the multiplier approach to it, and there are pros and cons to that sort of thing. But anyway, they come up with different sort of results. It seemed to be fairly specific to the particular program. But like I say, Cabela's example, they completely miss out on what was lost somewhere else. So we wanted to try a whole different sort of approach in this one. And what is more the macro level effect of our impact of these different sort of programs. So we built a model to try to look at these things. We would have liked to have done really economic growth. We couldn't really figure out a way to get that to work. But two variables we felt pretty good about in it were the employment impact of the programs and the tax revenue impacts. Sometimes what we hear about these different programs is, they'll pay for themselves when the businesses that are receiving the funds from it, the incentives, they'll either pay for themselves or they'll generate tax revenues we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So we looked at those two variables, the employment impact and the tax revenue. So you've got a 3-year and a 10-year impact of them. We're more confident on the 3-year than the 10-year in forecasting. I look at kind of like weather forecasting. You read a weather forecast, you're more confident about the 3-day forecast than you are about the 10-day forecast. But we put it in there and tried to look a little more long-term too. So I feel better about the 3-year columns that you see here. Anyway, these are the 8 programs that we picked out and they're actually ranked in order of how big they were in terms of the amount of concessions. So the industrial property tax is the largest of these tax incentive programs in Michigan, or was at the time, and we actually found a positive impact from them, both 3-year and 10-year, for both the employment impact and the tax impact. Well, what does that positive impact mean? Well, we gave a very generous standard here. You know, economists usually use cost-benefit analysis to try to analyze programs. Do the benefits outweigh the costs of a program? This is closer to a benefits analysis. Does the program produce benefits? Now, we did pick up some costs. I'm going a little too far with that. But when I say positive, I'm not really sure these, in fact, it's probably going to be a close call as to whether any of them even pass a cost-benefit test on these. But at least we found positive benefits. Some of them, before we even got serious about costs, they still had negative results, as you'll see on here. But anyway, the industrial property tax did come out positive as one. That's a fairly general one. In fact, I should mention this. The three that did I guess I got 4 of them here. The 4 that actually passed were the industrial property tax, the kind of funny named new personal property. This is actually business property like computers or desks or things like that. So it's called personal property incentive, but that's really more what it is. The Obsolete Property Rehabilitation Act and the Commercial Rehabilitation Tax Abatement. Those are the 4 that either passed or were at least neutral in the case of one. Those were also, I don't know if I want to generalize too much here, but those were also the ones that required the least government discretion in all of them. They were actually more, I think they were actually closer to being like tax breaks that you'd get on regular tax forms, that, you know, if you do what the program says you're supposed to do, you'll qualify for it. So it was under this category, but it was interesting that the ones that required the least discretion were the ones that seemed to do the best. Well, let's focus on some of the ones that didn't do well. Probably the worst, which I'll talk about a little bit more, was the film incentives. I've got another slide on that one. This program is gone, so I hope we contributed in a small way to getting rid of it, but it actually got phased out about 2014 or 2015. But I'll tell you in a minute about some of the things we paid for under the film incentives program. The Renaissance Zone Act came out pretty poorly. Well, you know, you probably remember Jack Kemp and the Renaissance zones 20 or 30 years ago. This actually was from that time period. And you know, I kind of like the idea of Renaissance zones, picking out areas that are really struggling in inner cities, places like that, and having some special tax breaks available for those sort of areas. You know, Jack Kemp, you might recall, was one of the big proponents of that. But this one came out really badly. Well, so we had to dig a little deeper on that one, and what happens, it got caught up in some fairness considerations. We had to be structuring it in a way that it's fair. Anybody want to take a guess at what a legislature would do? Yeah. Fairness is 1 Renaissance zone per legislative district. So kind of undermines the whole idea of the program. But yeah, if Representative Smith gets one in her district and Senator Jones gets one in his district, I should get one in my district. That sort of fairness, I guess. So I don't think it really lived up to the Renaissance zone idea. The one that's kind of the poster child for these incentives in Michigan is the MEGA, not MAGA, but MEGA, M-E-G-A, Michigan Economic Growth Authority Act. That's the one where there's an agency that really is in charge of figuring out who should get the tax incentives, and so they testify all the time, rather prominent in policy circles when they comment on different things, and we included they're doing a rather poor job of picking winners and losers, even though this is the agency that really fits that kind of profile I gave at the beginning. This is the agency that really fits that the best. Like I say, the new personal property did okay. The brownfield development, that actually was a neutral one, and if they actually are developing brownfields, I'd feel a lot better about that program, but it came out kind of neutral, and the other two did all right. Now, what if we add up all 8 of them? What's the impact of all 8 of them taken together? Well, we found it was negative across the board. So a few of them by themselves were fine, but as a whole, and we were only looking at 8 of them. We didn't do all 50, but we picked out the 8 that seemed the most important. And if we picked out the top 8 and added them all up, we concluded, we're not getting anything for what we're paying for here. In fact, we're getting a negative return or negative result as a result of these different programs in Michigan. All right, I wanted to mention the film incentive. Let's see what culturally enriching films got some film incentives in Michigan. So you got one of the Transformer movies that got a big tax incentive. Right below it, one of the Scream movies also got a big tax incentive. So that's what we paid for as Michigan residents. There's Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino in the top center. That's Batman versus Superman. My son actually was right nearby when one scene was filmed. He watched a little bit of and saw Ben Affleck on the Michigan State campus when that was being filmed. So I don't know if you saw any of these movies, could you tell that you were in Michigan when any of it was being filmed? I guess Gran Torino was kind of set that way. Alex Cross was another one, and then on the lower corner there's George Clooney in Ides of March as a kind of corrupt politician running for the Democrat Party nomination for president. Purely fictional, of course. Okay, shouldn't have said that. All right, so what do we conclude from all of this? Like I say, overall, we got a negative return in Michigan on these programs. They did more harm than good. So go back to should we or we can't afford to unilaterally disarm? Well, yes, we could. We would have been better off in Michigan if we had unilaterally disarmed and not done all of these different programs. So obviously some people benefit from them. I've got a little monopoly millionaire there that kind of suggests who actually does benefit from these programs, but as far as general benefits for the Michigan economy, and I think I'd feel pretty comfortable generalizing this elsewhere. They really aren't the benefits there. And then, even when the targeted tax incentives work, like the ones that I mentioned, 3 of them came out positive. Even when they work, the return the impact just isn't very big. We said, let's just take those 3 winners that we found, the 3 that did well. What is their impact? And so we add up just so. So what if we swept away all the other ones and just kept the 3 that they had listed as having a positive impact? Well, they did on the unemployment. Yes, they did lower the unemployment rate in Michigan by about 1/10%. By about 7,000 jobs. So all that effort in these programs, and the 3 that did well, that's all we got from them. I mean, just the 3 winners. Then on top of that, we've got the other ones dragging it down even more. But even when they work, it's not that big of an impact. So that's why I come back to my coupons at a restaurant. It only takes you so far if you use that kind of approach in your restaurant. I think these programs only take you so far, even when they do work, and most of the time they don't even accomplish that. Mentioning him shortly before this, Michael Lefebvre of the Mackinac Center had done another report on Michigan, and he estimated that each job created by targeted tax incentives had a cost of about $125,000. This is back in 2006 too, so we'd have to raise it quite a bit higher. So these are expensive programs for a very small return, if you even get that from them. So I mentioned the mission creep is quite common. I've got my dog jumping over the fence there, or a dog jumping over the fence kind of. So I mentioned the brownfield incentives already. We had a friendly state senator who found out about our report, and she made sure we got an interview with some of the top people at one of the agencies that do these programs. And I always remember this. We're having kind of a friendly talk with him, and I guess he was maybe getting a little comfortable. And then he started talking about how one of their new initiatives is fighting sprawl. That they're not going to give incentives in places where the companies would be building in such an area that adds to the sprawl problem in Michigan. And at some point I just had to blurt it out. Where is that in your mission, that you're supposed to be the agency that fights sprawl in Michigan? I mean, maybe it's not a horrible idea, but it's just, you can see it's government officials are now substituting their judgment for what it should be. And, maybe not even the judgment the legislature would necessarily have. But, you're turning this over to people who run these programs, and, their own preferences might work their way in. And of course, it favors the politically connected too. This is actually something we were kind of talking about in Michigan, not just our group, but was kind of a general topic of discussion in Michigan around that time too, as we were losing a lot of businesses. It seemed like the ones that were staying were the ones like the auto industry, the healthcare, a number of other industries that seemed to have pretty strong political connections in the state. And you certainly want these industries there, but that seemed to be the pattern that was emerging. The companies that were leaving were the ones that weren't politically connected, and the ones that were staying were the ones that were. We were just kind of gravitating toward that model of doing business, sort of making dependency on these sort of programs, for building that into the system. So, here in the auto industry, they don't like to get addicted to rebates on cars, and so people start expecting rebates and won't buy a car without getting a rebate. We're kind of getting to that point in Michigan where only the companies that were staying were the ones that were getting these kind of incentives, and the ones that were leaving were the ones who maybe didn't want to bother with the process or weren't connected well enough to accomplish that. Anyway, what's happened in Michigan since then? Well, Michigan's actually done quite a bit better since then. Maybe not all the policies that I necessarily would have adopted, but Michigan has de-emphasized these programs quite a bit. So the MEGA program, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, had its budget cut considerably. The film incentives were eliminated. There were quite a few other reforms that I think went in a positive direction. And also, Michigan got rid of the Michigan business tax and replaced it with a corporate income tax. It's very much like most states have, so and much more predictable too than the Michigan business tax was. So just a lot of different sort of fundamental reforms were done like that. And in the last decade, Michigan actually outpaced the average for the United States in terms of economic growth. So, we had the one-state recession in the decade before. In the last decade, we weren't at the top of the list, but we were better than average in terms of economic growth. So, I think, I'd say focusing on fundamentals, that's really the key, figuring out how to make the state economy better so that businesses will want to come there rather than giving them coupons so that they'll come to a state that's less desirable than the one that they really wanted to go to. So I think we've kind of see that lesson from the state, and that's just a note I'd like to conclude on here. That as Kansas talks about these sort of programs, I hope to take a lesson from Michigan from its lost decade. That this just isn't the way to try to build an economy. It really has more costs than benefits on balance, and it's just giving out coupons to your restaurant to keep it from failing. That's all we're really accomplishing with these kind of programs. So anyway, hope we can, here in Kansas, I hope we can focus on how to do good reforms and not try to focus on these kind of programs. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks for being here and sharing that with us.
Oh, thank you.
So, just kind of a two-part question. Number one, have you surveyed the country to find out if there was a state that did get it kind of right with this kind of program?
No, I have. Yeah, I have.
Part is, if that's not the answer, what can states do to kind of get businesses to come to their state?
Well,
getting out 2 months.
Yeah, I just do the same way a restaurant would. Make the business environment better. Look at your tax system, see if it's creating disincentives. Simplify the tax code. Look at regulatory requirements and try to make them more sensible in terms of regulatory codes. Actually, that's another issue in Michigan too. I mentioned the environmental agency. It was a rather aggressive environmental agency for quite some time, and it got reined in. I think that's another factor in what helped Michigan. I haven't looked at how big that was, but it was kind of notorious as being a disincentive to businesses to coming into the state for a while there. And I know its reputation is much better now as an environmental agency. So I say just all the sort of things that we should be talking about with economic growth strategies. Don't do the gimmicks like targeted tax incentives. Do the real reforms. Yeah,
I have two questions. The first one relates to the last question as to what changed in Michigan. At what point did they pass the right to work law?
Yes, that was which election? It was right after an election. I'm trying to remember which one that was.
but it was back in just ahead of this improved decade, if my memory
Yes,
is right.
it was. So I'm trying to remember if it was 2012 or 2014. What happened was there was a ballot initiative to put right to union, to prevent right to work that the unions put up, and it got defeated like 60-40, and so that emboldened the legislature, and they came back and in the lame duck session right after it failed, that's when it passed. So.
And you mentioned that the auto business was staying around, but my recollection is most of the new autos, my Subaru, for example, is made in America in one of the right-to-work states, and
yes.
I think a high proportion of the losses. So that's
Yes.
Not external factors, but internal factors.
Yes.
But my other question is, you didn't cost benefit ought to be the basis of any study, and two things related to that. Number one, I can't figure out. You showed a slight increase in employment as a result of tax incentive, and I certainly would understand if you get free taxes for a while for hiring some people, I can understand that would increase appreciably, but the cost, again, why would you not factor that in?
Just hard to factor it in, just hard to get a measure of everything, and two, we thought the results really spoke for themselves, that if this is the best you can do, even under our really generous criteria, if this is the best they could do, then, we're still not getting any return in Michigan. And yeah, you're right, if we added costs, the picture would be even worse than what we did, but we thought it was pretty bad from just what we found. So yeah, that would have been a logical step to do, but I guess I thought we made our case without taking that step.
Yeah, I know many people go to Texas and Florida with no state income tax, and they're sent around that trying to get up to Kansas. And so our job force started increasing, and then they did away with that, and now we're losing businesses as we speak, correct?
Yes. I have to say, I'm not really quite up to speed on Kansas issues, so I came here just 2 years ago, so I'm kind of getting, I don't want to get out ahead of myself. I mean, Art Hall over at Kansas is my counterpart at their institute. He's definitely the expert on all of this, so I guess I'd refer you to him, and I believe, anyway, he's...
Texas and Florida.
Yes.
Companies go down there.
Well, they do, yes. I mean, you can see that, yeah. Texas has had fantastic economic growth. Yes.
When I was on the county commission, the most popular tax incentive program that came before local governments here, and I'm including the city and all the other local units, were industrial revenue bonds, some with a property tax exemption, as much as 100%, some without.
Yeah.
How similar is that to when you had industrial property tax?
Yeah.
Including there in similarities and differences between Michigan and Kansas, if you're familiar with, I don't know.
Yeah, I am somewhat, not a lot. I'm getting up to speed on this, so yeah, I need to do some more work on all of that. I think the Michigan program, from what I understand, it didn't require very much discretion, so it was closer to being like a tax break that anybody qualifies for, who, if you do certain things, you got it. So is your program, the program you're describing, one that required more discretion, as some got it and some didn't?
In terms of the, there were some that basically was used as a financial tool for plant expansion or for buying like heavy machinery and equipment often here, but in other cases, it also included a property tax. And I had business people tell me that the corporate income tax was less of a problem than the property tax, because if you had zero profits, you had zero corporate income tax.
Yes.
But your property tax, came around twice a year regardless.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, I'd have to do some more research. I don't want to hold myself out as an expert yet on Kansas. I like us to get there at our center, but I'm still working toward it.
Thanks for being here, Ted.
Oh, thanks, John.
Week after week, if you watch the City Council, the Wichita City Council, we have developers, businesses who go to the well. They talk about all the jobs they can create, all the great projects that will make our city council people look like visionaries.
Yeah.
They can do all these projects, except they can't do them if they have to pay taxes like everybody else. How do we deal with the city council people, or should we actually be working with our state legislators and having some of these programs tempered?
Yes, well, in Michigan, the approach they took was at the legislative level. So, yeah, I can't fault the developers that if they have a chance to get these programs, somebody has to say no to them, to the programs, I think is that. I'll just tell a little story there, that's somewhat related to that. Around the time we were doing this, Patrick and I got involved in a tax appeal for a Michigan corporation where the Department of Treasury in Michigan had made a very unfavorable ruling toward them, and they were very upset about it. And they came to us, and we said, as an economic analysis, and that was supposed to be the basis for one of the criteria for it, it seems like you have a really strong case, and we kind of talked them through on all of that. And then they said, I can't believe we're even doing this. I mean, the state of Michigan gave us this tax break to come here, and now they're beating up us on the other hand with this other revenue ruling. And it turns out they'd have been in a meeting with someone from the Treasury Department who actually used that. Well, since you got the tax break to move your headquarters from another state to Michigan, you've already gotten your break. You shouldn't be objecting when we have this other ruling. And I bit my tongue as I was hearing this from our paying client at the time. But it just really does illustrate it. What the state gives or what the local government gives, the government can take away. So if we do get dependent on these kind of programs, that's a whole nother issue too, that if it is discretionary, the discretion works in both directions.
One quick one.
Oh, okay.
It said basically the jobs are created by small businesses, not by the large.
Tax yes.
incentives are usually used to lure companies here, and they have the advantages basically. That's where
Yeah. Just to be clear, on ours, we weren't really looking at these being jobs created by the specific company that got the break. This is the economic impact for the state of these programs.
The question basically, instead of having tax incentives, maybe we have low taxes and less regulation.
Yeah, that's exactly. Exactly.
On that note, Professor Ted Bolema.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.